What's up, everybody? This is Passion 9. Welcome back once again in the lead up to Passion 9's Halloween. I will today be reviewing Resident Evil 3 Remake, or as I often like to call it, RE3make. I like coming up with nicknames for remakes because there's so goddamn many of them nowadays. You just kind of have to do that. Anyway, this game, it's been a bit of a belated playthrough for me because, of course, it came out back in spring, and I was hesitant to pick it up initially because it was $60, and a lot of games were coming out at that time. And, you know, I wasn't feeling it. I was like, I'll wait till they cut it down a bit. And they have. And I finally played it. Beat it in like an afternoon. You know, it's a Resident Evil game. It's not very long. Right off the bat, I want to say a lot of the criticisms this game has been getting, and I will write it off right off the bat here. Stop complaining that this game is too short. Stop complaining about the length of Resident Evil 3. Because right off the bat, I will say it right here, right now, any criticisms I have about this game have absolutely nothing to do with the length. The length is fine. It's actually perfectly fine for a Resident Evil game. The campaign is exactly the length of any other Resident Evil campaign. If you have played any other Resident Evil game, the first one, the Claire and Leon campaigns in RE2, it's the same thing. Not just the same length, but pretty much the same structure as well. This opening city area right here that you're seeing now is akin to the police station at the start of RE2. You know what I mean? You're exploring, you're looking for items, you're combining stuff, and, you know, collecting whatever you happen to find off the beaten path. Eventually Nemi shows up and starts chasing you. It's just, you know, it's classic Resident Evil, really. It may be out in the streets rather than in a building, but I mean, structurally, this game's campaign feels like any other to me, you know, and I mean that in a good way, of course. So yeah, my first run took me about 5 or so hours, and that's pretty standard for a Resident Evil game. I've always argued that horror games are always better when kept a bit more on the short side, especially Resident Evil, because the charm of these games is going back and getting better times and, you know, seeing how well you can survive, how well you can retain your resources and find all the items and such. So, yeah. Big problem I feel with a lot of other people's takes on this game is it's short. It's short. It's a short game. Yeah, it's a short game. Every Resident Evil is a short game. That's not the issue. Yeah, you do only have one campaign here as a side, instead of the Chris and Jill or Claire and Leon campaigns you had in the previous two games, of course. And that was always true of the original Resident Evil 3 as well. So, we'll get to
Carlos, I've reached the main avenue.
the gripes, because I do have my gripes with this game. There are ways in which it could have been better, and we'll get to that. But first off, I want to say it's a solid third-person action game. It reminds me a bit of 4 in some respects, in that the focus here is definitely more on action. It gives you a hell of a lot more ammo and health items than RE2 Remake did. And it's a good thing, because you will be shooting a lot more in this game. You will be fighting zombies a lot more. There's a lot more of them. They come at you in all directions. And even an RE2 Remake Pro, who has played that game from top to bottom since it came out, struggled a fair bit on my first run, because yeah, they're a lot more grabby in this game, which I've noticed. A lot more grabby, and I think that is to compensate for the fact that you now have this Let's see if I could show it off here. This miraculous dodge. Boom, there it is. You can just dodge roll your way out of the zombies. Now, it's not as easy to pull off as it looks. They didn't suddenly make you Bayonetta. I mean, you're not like grab proof anymore or anything, but as you can see, I still miss it about half the time, but the timing on it is very demanding. So yeah, it's not like the game is suddenly easier. It's just a new way to play. They've made the zombies more aggressive. I definitely feel they've made them more grabby than the RE2 remake, which is really saying something because they were quite grabby in that game too. But it feels good to pull off. The dodge mechanic, honestly, as simple a thing as it might sound, is probably my favorite addition to this game. Hands down. Like, it's my favorite part of the game. I think it's fun to pull off. It's tricky enough that you may miss it on several occasions, but it adds a nice little, like, gamble to the mechanics where sometimes I find myself bravely just walking into the zombies, hoping I'll get the timing right, because it's extremely satisfying when you do. You know, it's not something you could typically do in these games. So it kind of changes the rules up, you know, kind of changes the usual instincts you would have in a Resident Evil game. And it's especially good for, like, speed running or anything like that, the better you get at doing the dodge mechanic, because you can find yourself not only dodging zombies that way, but other enemies as well. And even though this game does have more of an emphasis on the action, and gives you a lot more ammo and resources to do so, you still have, you know, all the option in the world to bypass enemies if you want, and that's still a good way to play. So, yeah, the action is better. The gameplay, honestly, is better than ever. All that stuff is really, really good. You still get those squishy critical headshots every now and again when you get a zombie in the head. And the weapons are extremely satisfying. I love the new weapons that they've added as well, especially the assault rifle that you get to wield as Carlos. I'm always giddy when a Resident Evil game gives me machine guns, because that's not something you typically see in these games. You know, usually it's like a pistol or a shotgun. And they're just so empowering, you know, because it's not something you typically have. Even though you still have to conserve your ammo to some degree in this game, it's far lighter on that sort of thing than previous games. And this was true of the original RE3 as well, for the most part. I don't feel like the ethos there has changed. Like, it's still very much a game where you don't want to waste too much ammo, you don't want to waste too much healing items, but there's not as much of that to concern yourself with in RE3, that's for sure. Because the game gives you plenty of resources most of the time. There's also less backtracking in RE3, but not as much as I was expecting. Another thing I've heard from a lot of people is that it's a lot more linear than the RE2 remake, and this is true to an extent. There are only two major areas in Resident Evil 3 that feature any kind of backtracking or exploration. One of them is this opening city area. There's a hospital later in the game that kind of reminds me of, like, the mansion from the original game, or, again, something like the police station or whatever, where there's a lot of nooks and crannies. You will be looking at the map to see, like, you know, what you've missed or whatever, and reorient yourself. So it's not like this game has abandoned that stuff. I do compare it to Resident Evil 4 at times, because much of the game does feel like that. But there's still a pretty decent amount of exploration. There's still some, I mean, you could see it here, that there's some shortcuts I just made for myself there. And there we go, another successful dodge. It's really fun. I love that dodge mechanic. I want that in every Resident Evil game now. You still have save rooms, of course, the storage box, all that stuff is still there. But overall, the biggest change-up this game has made, there are fewer puzzles, There are more linear sections here and there, but the biggest change for me is the fact that you do only have one campaign here. You do get some time as Carlos in the later sections of the game, so you do get to switch to another character. His dodge is Jill's dodge is actually replaced with a really cool punch that Carlos can do. So he doesn't exactly play the same. And he gets his own set of weapons as well. So it's a nice change-up, but you don't get separate campaigns like you did in RE2 Remake, which again was true in the original Resident Evil 3. So for the most part, it is, you know, a remake. They did cut some areas like the clock tower and the park that were two major areas in the original game. I thought that would be a bigger issue going into this, but again, lengthwise, it's the same. You know, it still has just as much meat for the most part. So while I could understand people being a little bummed at not seeing their favorite locations get recreated, which is something RE2 Remake did really well. They expanded the areas that were left in the game. Like, again, the hospital section later on is a hell of a lot bigger than the hospital in RE3 original. So I feel like they made cuts to beef up other areas, which I'm fine with, you know. It's not like they cut those areas and made a smaller game. They cut those areas to beef up a few others. So, I mean, you're not losing content there. This is a very solid campaign. I think the only rough spot I have, oddly enough, is the opening section, which I'm not showing off here. The opening intro is very interesting visually. You start off in Jill's apartment. You get a first-person perspective, very briefly, like the one seen in the announcement trailer. And then you spend a pretty lengthy set piece just running from Nemesis. And it's pretty exhilarating the first time you play the game. It's pretty awesome. It's probably the most cinematic, bombastic thing I've seen in a Resident Evil game in quite some time. And it reminds me of something out of like an Uncharted game, and just the way it's, just how cinematic it is. Where you know, you have Jill just running through all these alleys and evading all these zombies. The problem is that whole opening sequence is entirely scripted. It's very, very scripted. It's extremely linear. You're basically on rails. And the worst part of it is there's no gameplay in that opening sequence. And it made me think back to RE2 Remake's opening sequence, which had you stopping at a little gas station. Whether you were Leon or Claire, it was the same for both, of course. And one of the brilliant things about RE2's opening is that you had what was essentially a small little tutorial. You know, it wasn't just for show or to establish a mood. That gas station was a nice little enclosed area that taught you the basics of how to play the game. You know what I mean? How to evade the zombies, how they would work in that game. And it was a crash course. Gave you a little zombie crash course. But it was also just a good way to establish or kind of foreshadow the threat outside of Raccoon City. You know, outside the city limits or whatever. And to have Leon and Claire meet there. And by comparison, the RE3 opening, although a hell of a lot more flashy and cinematic, and very memorable, no doubt. I'm sure a lot of people worked really hard on it because it looks incredible. But there's no gameplay. And that sequence goes on a long time. It's a very long sequence. And yeah, it's essentially just an interactive cutscene. You don't have any danger. You're not really in any danger. I mean, I guess if you stop holding up on the stick, maybe something will kill you. I haven't actually tested it myself. But it's one of those sequences where you will be very impressed the first time, and then I feel like on repeat playthroughs you're going to be like, I want to skip this entire thing because there's no threat, there's no strategy, there's no gameplay. It's not really teaching me anything about the game other than Raccoon City is screwed. But it's too long for an opening gameplay sequence that doesn't feature any actual agency for the player, you know what I mean? There are numerous ways that could have been done better, and I just feel like, sure, visually, very strong effort, a lot of effort put into it, but as a gameplay sequence, it's lazy as hell. Very lazy. And that's probably the worst thing I could say about maybe the campaign itself, is that that sequence feels very, very protracted, you know? Or maybe that's the word. It feels too linear, too on rails. And as a matter of fact, on repeat playthroughs, I've decided to leave a save file immediately following that sequence at the train station. This way, I would never have to go through it again when I start the game over. You know, because it's like, there's only so many times that's going to impress me when there's so little going on. Now, that's an easy way to bypass the issue, but the fact that I have to come up with such a, you know, bypass in the first place feels kind of like I wish they had just made that sequence more playable, in addition to being so cool looking. But luckily, from then on, the game is, I mean, it's a fun time. It's a roller coaster. Would I say it's quite as good as the RE2 remake when it comes to puzzles and item management? Definitely not. There's not as much of that in general for this game. But I do like the way they've handled the boss fights. The boss fights against Nemesis are very exciting. A few of them might even top the stuff from RE2 Remake, which, you know, had pretty simplistic boss fights that felt very old school to begin with. And yeah, they're fun, they're challenging, they're exciting. I do wish, another problem I do have with the campaign is I do wish Nemesis had stayed in his base form a little longer. There's a point halfway through the game where he transforms into, without being too specific, a big beast, you know? Because that's the thing Resident Evil monsters typically do after a while. He just turns into a big bad beastie boy. And he kind of loses that humanoid menace, you know, that he has in the beginning. And while this is more or less the same length as any other Resident Evil game out there, I do wish we had like another hour or so of him just hulking around, chasing you with the rocket launcher or the flamethrower. I feel like there was just not enough of that in this game. Granted, that's more a compliment than anything else. It just means they did a good job with the hulky, big bad Nemesis. I suppose it is a shame that we also don't get the same treatment with his AI that we got with Mr. X. You know, he doesn't chase you in the same fashion. It's very scripted. But it is handled really well. Basically, he's more like the G mutant, more like the Birkin monster in RE2 Remake than the Mr. X monster, you know what I mean? Which is not a bad thing, because each of his encounters are fun, they are memorable, they are fun to revisit. So, there's that. But he transforms earlier than I would like, and then he's just not the same monster anymore. He's a cool monster, but he's not the same monster, you know what I mean? He's no longer that hulking Terminator-esque thing that I would have liked a little longer. But for the most part, that's where my criticisms mostly lie with this game, and where I'll get deeper into things, is that while the campaign is a fun, blistering, challenging, mostly filler-free escapade, I wanted more of it. I wanted more of the gameplay, I wanted more of the combat, and I feel like the best way to handle that, while keeping the campaign in its quick, brief running time, would have been to give us a freaking mercenaries mode, which is not in the game. Yes, this was a big part of the classic original Resident Evil 3, was the mercenaries arcade mode, which became kind of a tradition for the series afterwards. You had it in RE4, you had it in RE5. Hell, to me it was still the best part of playing RE5. I enjoyed the mercenaries mode in 5 more than 5 itself, because that's how fun it was and how addicting it could be. You know, you have a timer, you pick a character, and you basically just run around dealing with hordes of enemies and trying to stay alive as long as you can before your time runs out. And it was just a fun, free-form way, a fun, quick-fix way to enjoy the combat and the mechanics. And especially with this game's kick-ass dodge mechanic, I wanted that so badly after finishing the first campaign, the first run. I was like, man, this game needed a mercenaries mode, man. It needed some kind of arcadey side mode or battle mode. That would have been just so freaking baller. But instead, the reason we didn't get that is because Capcom decided to do an online multiplayer mode bundled with the game called Resistance, which, I mean, as soon as I saw others playing that, I saw clips, I saw footage, that was enough for me. I haven't tried it myself. I don't think I ever will. I don't like the asymmetrical gameplay style they're going for. I don't know why they decided on that. I mean, I get the idea. One player controls the mastermind and 6 monsters onto the human survivors, the other players. So it's basically 1 against a team of human survivors. I get the idea in... I get the idea theoretically makes sense. It's like, okay, that's very Resident Evil, right? One player controls like a Wesker-esque character, and you're just dropping down monsters and enemies onto the player's path. Problem I have with that, and the problem the game apparently is having, reportedly since it launched, was that a lot of people want to play as the Mastermind. There's only 1 slot open for the Mastermind. So you run into a problem where you're going to have a lot of waiting periods for people just trying to, I guess, fight over that one position. I mean, personally, I'd rather play as the survivors if I was playing it, because to me that just sounds more Resident Evil than having, like, all this power and, you know, controlling all these different subordinates. But my feeling is, why not go with a team against team situation? Why not have one side control human survivors and one team control multiple monsters? You could have, like, one player play as a Licker. You could have another player control Mr. X. You could just have a team controlling monsters. Then you'd have a much better player base. You'd have far less filling around with the mechanics. You wouldn't have this weird drop-in balancing issue where one player is essentially God. You know, it's just a little too much for me. I don't get asymmetrical multiplayer, so I was never all that interested in that. I would have preferred a mercenaries mode, is what I'm saying. Give me more offline content, you know? Or do both. Either way, I just feel like it's a bit underwhelming as far as extras go. That's a good way to sum up the RE3 package, is that there's a lot here that, compared to the original PlayStation 1 release, just isn't present. You know, you don't have the original game had this boutique that after you beat your first run, you could go into a boutique in the city using a key, and you could find like a whole slew of unlockable costumes that were just there to change into. In this game, you have like one, or I think it's just one. I think there's DLC for her classic RE3 outfit that you could get Jillian. But in this version, there's only one that you can unlock with the in-game currency. You unlock a little shop after you beat the game. And there's some cool weapons. There are some cool extra weapons you can unlock if you play enough and do enough cool stuff. But there's only one unlockable costume. And it's her old Star's outfit, which I'm wearing now. It's a cool addition. I'm glad it's there, but like, really? That's it? Compared to the original, like, you had all these outfits. You had, like, Regina's outfit from Dino Crisis. You had, like, the clubbing outfit. You had the Wild West outfit. You had all this cool stuff she could wear. And that, in addition to the Mercenaries mode, and the fact that the original had the, what was it? The active selection mode. I forget what they called it, but the little screen freeze where you would have to decide between running out of the exploding gas station or jumping down into the basement or something like that. You had this little thing that would pop up that gave you choices during pivotal moments. And basically, it was a branching path system. The game had multiple endings. You had branching paths that would unlock depending on how you handled those choices. And it would. Sorry, I'm getting hit by these little fleas here. They're disrupting my need to articulate here. As you can see, it's a very intense, nerve-wracking experience. It gets that very well. But anyway, yeah, so you had all these branching paths that would affect the way the game played, the way cutscenes played out, your interactions with Carlos. All that stuff was just really cool in the original PlayStation 1 version. And look, let's be honest, there's no excuse why it couldn't be in this game. Let's be real. Other than time and, you know, deadlines and, you know, it needed more time. It just needed more time to have those extra components. Now, does that mean the stuff that's there already is bad? No. The stuff that's there already is great. It's so great, in fact, that I wanted more. That's the point I'm trying to make here. It's a really great game, a great run-and-gun horror action game in a really slim, poor package. That is my feelings about RE3 for the most part. You know? There's just not enough outside of the core experience. But the core experience is rock solid, make no mistake. And, you know, as the price has gone down, I feel like, yeah, this is a fun lark. But I just hope for future remakes, whatever that may be, whether it's 4 or Code Veronica or whatever they do next, takes this into account. And knowing how well Capcom has taken feedback lately, I'm sure they will. But yeah, it's just kind of a shame there's not more there. Even the fact that it's been like several months now since the game came out and there hasn't been any DLC. They couldn't even just like give us some DLC Mercenaries mode? Anything? Even RE2 Remake, which already had a pretty decent amount of content, added some DLC stuff that was totally free about a month after it came out. So it lacks support. I mean, I guess they're still patching up and maybe improving that online resistance mode. Maybe that's doing well. Maybe people are enjoying it. From what I've heard, it's a bit clunky. But to each their own. Like I said, I don't know if I'll ever be trying that in the future, because I'm more of an offline guy. I don't think that counts as extra content for the single player offline stuff. You know, that's just a separate experience to me. That's okay, you included an online mode, but that's extra. You know, I don't own that. That's a server. That doesn't belong to me. You know what I mean? So it's just not the same.
Carlos, it's Jill. I've restored power to the sub.
But that is my biggest criticism. The core experience is fun. It looks gorgeous, obviously. The RE engine is still
Right.
one of the best graphics engines in the game market right now. So it looks like a trillion million bucks. Absolutely gorgeous game. I mean, from top to bottom, all the environments, all the monsters just look incredible. So yeah, it's a top tier production. It's another really good remake of a classic game. There are harder difficulty settings, so it's not like there's no replay value, which is another criticism I've heard. I call bullshit on that part because, though, there's definitely replay value. Hey, there's Nemesis. What's up, Nemesis? Yeah, there are multiple difficulty settings. There are a lot of, like, secret weapons and stuff to find off the beaten path. There are plenty of trophies for all the trophy hounds out there. And again, the game does come with a weapon shop. So that's a cool addition. At the very least, it gives you something to shoot for and work towards. And yeah, not as robust a package as the RE2 remake, but still a pretty cool game. It's got the same, more or less the same plot as the original. I do like the dialogue between Jill and Carlos. I do think that's been a fun improvement from the original game, honestly. I didn't think Carlos was all that great of a character in the original, but he's a much cooler dude in this one. I like the way they've handled the UBC in general, the counter bio weapon thing, whatever they are. The Umbrella Monster Killing Squad, let's call them that, is better handled in this game than I thought they were in the original. So, like, yeah, all that stuff's pretty good. It's pretty good. And if you really, really like Resident Evil games, horror games in general, and you don't mind it being a little bit more towards the action side, a little more aggressive and demanding of your reflexes, because it is a very, again, a very aggressive game compared even to RE2 Remake, then I think you'll have a pretty good time. I think it's pretty alright. Resident Evil 3 Remake. Check it out. And, of course, as always, fear for the passion. Till next time, guys. I'm gonna throw a grenade at Nemesis. That's how we're gonna finish this. Oh, shit! Oh, zombie from behind. Zombie from behind. Oh god, Nemesis is on top of me. Oh, eat this, dude. I think we just killed each other there. I think that's what we did.